Alright. So, in this video I'm gonna talk about my favourite thing. And, you know, maybe the only reason why I don't talk about this constantly is because it might not be particularly relevant or relatable for everyone. And the reason being is that you know, in this investigation, it kind of begins like we become aware of thought as a thought. And I guess you could say like the first layer of that is the overt, the kind of, it's kind of like a dialogue or a conversation in language, or images in the mind, in the head, so to speak, where I'm talking to myself, I'm narrating my experience, I'm narrating my relationship with life. So I'm talking about how I relate to my life, and usually that's going to be in the future or in the past, or talking about something that's not here. And that dialogue, that narration is the kind of like based on this internal world that is a world that's not present, that's not here, and that kind of distracts a lot of attention. Like for, at least for me, most of my attention was continually absorbed into this narrative. So for someone to talk about what I'm going to talk about now, it would have immediately been taken into that narrative, and I would have started talking about it in my mind, or like describing it to myself, or describing how it's here or not here, or how it's going to be in the future, and how I relate to it. This might not be relatable to everyone because of that function. That function has the power to override the sense experience, override the simplicity of what's actually here, and kind of like plaster this narrative over the top. Because the belief, the assumption there is that I have to relate to my experience to experience it for it to be relevant, or for me to understand where I am, what's going on, and how I relate to it, basically. So what I'm going to talk about now might seem quite obscure, or like unrelatable, or distant, or bizarre, or fantastic, when taken from that subjective position that relates to what I'm saying as a thought experience. So like the simplicity of this isn't quite accessible, so to speak, or there. It's like a one big step back before that narrative to a kind of thought that narrative is built upon, the assumptions that are assumed in that for that narrative to even be relevant, or seem like it has to be there, that subject and the object. These kinds of thoughts aren't obvious as thoughts until there is a kind of quietness of mind, I would say, a relaxation of that strong dialogue in mind, that strong subject-object relationship that feels like it is fundamental to experience. until that kind of calms down a bit, and that tends to calm down a bit. One with meditation, but you know, in a more, I guess you could say, more natural way, when that whole function is kind of inquired into, and it's like it can be allowed to relax naturally. I don't know quite what I mean by that. Like meditative states are can there can be mind quietness, but the assumption of me, the subject, the one who's meditating, can snap back as the essential way it is quite quickly. So the state is distinct. It's something I'm doing. It's something that's not normal. It's not the normal way it is. It's not like the nature of mind hasn't been deconstructed. It's like, for me, meditative states were kind of like a caused mind quietness, but there's a different kind of mind quietness that can just be this without it having to be a state, or something special or distinct or specific, if that makes sense. And within that, even with the meditation, but within that, these deeper forms of thought can be seen. Something sees them. That a view that's deeper than that can see it. Again, this is going to be very difficult to speak about, which is, I suppose, why I enjoy speaking about it, because it's kind of challenging, and the language is weird and stuff. But what I'm talking about is the augmented version of reality, experience, perception, this filter, this human filter that we're looking through, that constructs three-dimensional time-space reality in a subject-object split. And when I talk about this, it might just be like, it might seem like I'm talking about something fantastic or some experience that's distinct from what you're experiencing now, that's going to happen, and it's going to change everything, and it's going to look different. But it's not like that. Basically, what I'm talking about is what you're experiencing now, in the absence of that filter, which is a thought augmentation, that's something that's added to the absolute non-separate simplicity of the sense experience right now. Sorry, 2 seconds. So, as in, there's something being added to experience that's not actually inherent in the experience itself. There's like a filter that we're looking through. That's why I like the augmented reality. Reality is augmented onto the sense experience. There isn't actually a reality. A reality is a way it is, excluding a way it isn't. It's not the whole picture. It's almost like what you are that is deeper and transcending or here in a more simple way before experience is created. Because what you are is transcendent of experience altogether, you can kind of like relax, say, so to speak, back to that position, such that what's being added to this, what you're augmenting onto the experience, can be clear for what it is, as in it's not actually here. And bear in mind, when I say not actually here, the mind will create a reality out of that it's going to look like a certain way. So, like, for example, when I say that distance, separation isn't actually here, that doesn't mean that, how do I put this? You're going to have an experience where it disappears. You'd maybe communicate it like that, but the mind's version of what that is isn't what it is, because nothing actually disappears that isn't here. It's not actually here anyway. It's taken to be real. It's experience. It's having the real experience of there actually fundamentally being distance and experience that's inherent to experience, and that's just the way it is, and it's real. You see that that's added. You see that that's a thought. The thought doesn't stop being what it is. A thought that augments distance onto the experience, it doesn't stop being what it is. It's seen not to be there. It's not actually there. It's just a thought. It's not real. It's not actually real. It has its own reality as a thought, so it doesn't stop. It doesn't necessarily go away. It's just seen not to be there in the first place. It's seen as a thought. Sorry, and I'm having storage issues on my phone, so that should be okay. Where was I? So there's a, I think it's a Hindu analogy that's used, if people are familiar with this, of the snake and the rope. So from the corner of your eye you see a snake, and it's believed to be a snake. Your mind recognizes it as a snake, so you're having the experience that you're standing next to a snake. You're about to stand on a snake, a cobra or something like that, something poisonous. So you like, and then you look at it directly, and you realize that it's a rope, but what you saw it as from the corner of your eye was a snake. Your mind projected the experience of a snake onto a rope, but when you look at it, you actually see it was never a snake. It's actually just a rope. But at one point there was the real experience of there being a snake there. Upon closer inspection, you see that it's not. There's no snake there. I think that's a good analogy for this. It's kind of like we have the real experience of there being a separation at all here, that this is a separated up experience, that I'm here, I'm looking across space, it's an object, a series of objects over there, and that's just the way it is. But upon closer inspection, you see that that's not actually the experience. That's an experience, but there's something more essential than that. There's something more simple than that. That you look in, and you're no longer having the real experience of distance, because you see the distance, and there's no such thing as distance. Distance is only distance when occupying a subjective position in relation to an object that's apart from what I am. But when you relax that augmentation, there is no distance. So you see it at a more essential reality, so to speak, that is more real in a way than the subject-object split. It's more simple, it's more fundamental, it's more inherent. And you actually kind of start to experience simultaneously. It's not like experience changes to subject object, no subject object, and along a timeline. It's not like that. It's not in time. But you start to experience the augmented version of this, the reality, the three-dimensional time-space reality, and you see that that's being augmented onto something that's completely, something that doesn't have that in it, fundamentally. And then it's almost like you're aware of both of them. Like, so for example, if you like another good analogy is the screen. So you go to see a movie, you're watching the movie screen, and you know it's off, it's at the start, and you see this big square, rectangular square. Where's you get a square movie screen? A rectangular screen. It's clear that that's just one object, a screen, and so you're seated quite close to it, and then the movie comes on, and then you start to experience a multitude of different things, a whole world projected onto that screen that you get really into, and it seems real. And then you kind of snap out of it, but there's an awakening that I'm really invested in this movie, and then you kind of relax your peripheral out, and simultaneously you're aware of what's going on in the movie, but you're also aware of the screen. So then it's like the movie is clearly just a screen with projections on it. The forms on the movie screen aren't anything other than the screen. They're not real. They're not actually real. It's not a three-dimensional world. You're not in it, so to speak. That's another good analogy. So it's like you simultaneously become aware of the world, the experience of a three-dimensional world of form and objects and moving through time and such. But at the same time, there's a kind of deeper knowing, I don't know if that's a good way to put it, that this is all just a projection. It's not actually inherently real as the way it is. So then the way it is starts to kind of lose its grip as a real experience, and something more unknowable and mysterious that you are starts to shine through simultaneously with the way it is, the reality. So in that, the reality starts to become more interesting, because you're like, how is this being created from something that's not that? Like, the way I would describe it is like the substance of experience, awareness, presence, whatever you like to call it. The substance is the same. Substance is one, non-dual, and it's all the same substance: seeing, hearing, feeling. The substance is presence or awareness or whatever you'd like to use to describe it. Immediacy, whatever. But as this substance, it has this filter has the ability to generate an array of different experience, which it starts to seem so bizarre, because it's like it never, it's so mysterious. It never just clarifies how that's happening ultimately. It's like it just gets more and more mysterious, but more and more natural at the same time. And then this strange paradox of absolute miracle, absolute impossibility that this even is, but at the same time it's completely natural, completely peaceful, completely normal. Remarkable and unremarkable at the same time. And it's completely beautiful. It's so weird because you can just... I don't know quite how to describe this, but when there is this deep knowing that this projection isn't actually inherent or fundamental as a reality, but there's still the experience of the human experience of there being a reality, but it's being made from something that's beyond that simultaneously. That experience is just indescribably paradoxical and bizarre. It never gets old. It never gets boring. Because the mind never figures it out. The mind is always chasing it. The mind is always mesmerized by its own substance. It's just impossible. It's just miraculous. And then I don't know if everyone has that same experience, but for me it's never dulled. It's never dulled. It's like the realization happening over and over and over again right now. And that part of you that's deeper than it, it's natural, peaceful, normal. That part of you that's human, that exists in the augmentation, it's just incredible. It's mind-blowing. That's why it's my favourite part about this to talk about. Because this for me is when realization stopped assuming just the quality of totality of the mind, the totality of self-awareness, or the knowingness, or the kind of encapsulated bubble of oneness, and it started to become more visceral and immediate and real. So you can kind of imagine it like this, just to highlight that. There's a realization that all is mind, all is awareness, consciousness. I am. And the world, my body, appears within what I am, which is this conscious awareness. There's like there's a whole context in that. There's a dualistic framing in that, which the way it isn't is the materialist view of consciousness is created by this mind body. But then you kind of lean back into that, and it's like, yes, all of this is consciousness, awareness. Yes, my only experience of a mind body appears within what I am. But at the same time, consciousness, awareness is created by the body and the brain at the same time. It's like it can't be one way or another, but the leaning back into the senses comes with a visceral realness that this sense of consciousness, awareness doesn't quite have. There's an unrealness to that experience. There's a detachment, there's a leaning back away from the senses, from physical reality, but then there's a leaning back into the senses, physical reality, that for me was quite frightening, because there was a comfort in being consciousness and none of this actually being inherent. What I am is the most inherent thing. But then you lean back into it and it's like, no, that's a polarity. You can't say that the mind doesn't create consciousness. Relatively, there is an experience of that, that it can't be one way or the other. It's both or neither. So then it's like it's like leaning back from immortality back into mortality, and then you kind of, it balances out, and it's like mortal but immortal, finite but unlimited. Which I know will freak some people out for me to say that, you know, consciousness, awareness is a product of this body and brain. But you can't say that's not true because you'd be subscribing to a polarity. I'm not saying either. I'm saying the body brain appears within consciousness, but consciousness is dependent on the body and brain, both and neither. So there's no leaning into a polarity, and it's this leaning to leaning back to a sense of subjectivity. There's an over leaning back. It's actually, by the way, it's actually back this way. It's not somewhere else. It's actually leaning back this way, and in the looking, in the hearing, leaning back to what's behind the point of view, into that subjectivity, and then you kind of lean forwards into what the point of view is aware of, objectivity, and that's when the subject-object collapses. There's a kind of like over leaning back to the sense of subjectivity with this consciousness thing, with this all is awareness, and it's like an identity back here, but it's dissociative from objectivity, it's dissociative from the object of senses, and then there's a leaning into that, into the product of the senses, the form, and then there's kind of like a settling between the two. And there can be an oscillation, or as you call it, an oscillation, a fluctuation, a flow, a rhythm between the two for a while. So it's a hard thing to describe, but basically like the all is consciousness thing is a leaning back, a kind of over leaning back into the sense of subjectivity. The all is sensation is a kind of over leaning forwards into the sense of objectivity, the object of experience and the experiencer. And then at some point neither of them are relevant, but they still both have their own experiential flavour. So there's access to both of them. Access to the subject and the object, which are just completely simultaneous and seamless anyway. There isn't actually a division between the two anyway. There isn't a subject without the object, there isn't an object without the subject. These are just kind of like framings of this augmented reality that are there as part of the whole. So what is the augmentation? What is the virtual reality? So there are a set of, so this experience of this real me in the centre of experience that relates to, it starts off as an internal world, relates to a world which is a reflection of this that's based in past or future, with a me in the centre. This is based on this subject-object dynamic, this real existence of a separate subject relating to a separate object experience. That's something that's added to the sense experience in immediate reality, and then this internal world is kind of built upon and within this assumption. The assumption is that there is a relationship at all, that there is a subject and an object, that there is a me here and a world out there. And this selfing thing ignores immediacy, ignores the immediate sense experience, because it can't maintain its reality in direct experience. So it goes indirect, it takes attention somewhere else, past or future. It relates within itself to a world of thought, to avoid looking at the world that is here. Because when you look at it it doesn't take long, you see that it is not a world. That the idea of a world is based on the subjective point of view, and it's an assumption that's added to this as a thought experience. So, depending on who's watching, some of you, when I talk like this, you'll start to feel it. You'll start to notice what I'm talking about in experience. It starts to kind of shine through. It's like there's something that you are that's here, that's more immediate, more fundamental than the experience of an external world from the point of view of this discrete internal self. And part of you knows that. The experience of reality is something that is being added to experience. It's kind of like the essence of experience is there being a reality, but it's like a kind of VR headset goggle that we're looking through. And the VR's headset, in looking through it, it creates this experience of a subject looking at an object, a self and a world, an experience and an experiencer. It adds that to experience. It augments that reality onto what's not a reality. It augments the way it is onto something that is in the way. And it's what you're looking at right now in the absence of the one who's looking. It's the world that you're looking at right now in the absence of it being a world. And there are these assumptions that are, when you look, you see, so to speak, they're not there. They're simply not there. So one of them is that I'm looking across space at an object that's far away, at a distance from what I am. The space is invisible, you never see it, but it's reified as actually being there by this augmented reality. So if you hear this and the mind starts coming in to explain this and describe how this is true or not true, that's missing it. You'll be missing it that way, because it's more immediate than that. It's before that whole thing starts up. There was never an empty space. There was never a relative distance from my point of view. That's not the experience. The experience isn't that I see across space. The space creates the necessity for seeing, perception. Of course, it's not actually there. You can't see it. That might sound absurd to some people, but you can't see it. But that assumption puts things at a distance. So I'm looking at these Harland and Wolff cranes in the distance there. And there can be perception, there can be the subject and an object. The subject is me looker, and the object is the Harland and Wolff big yellow crane. But what's more immediate than that? The assumption also is there's just empty, clear space between me and that. But when you actually look, where does the image of that actually appear? Is it actually over there in the awareness of it? Does awareness know over there-ness, or is it just aware? Does awareness know there's someone looking, a looker, or is looking just so? This will never make sense to the mind, because the mind is all based on this sense of subjectivity relating to an object, which is a thought. You're starting to go deeper than the mind, to that which is neither mind nor no mind, or both and neither. It doesn't make any sense, which is why it's fascinating, because you can stare at it forever and it never stops being bizarre, because you're going beyond your human limitations. You're seeing something, so to speak, that's beyond the sense of the one seeing. There's like a transcendent quality to this that defies all mind logic. So the assumption that there is distance, that I'm having the experience of being a subject looking at an object, isn't actually the experience. It's added to the substance of experience with, again, its own substance, which is mind. We're looking through a VR headset. That experience as a thought never goes away because it's just arising due to conditions. It serves a purpose, it's a function, to be able to orient this body in three-dimensional time-space. That doesn't have to be a reality for that experience to continue, and it's not. The other one is that there are multiple objects and they're distinct, and I know what they are. So if we look, there is appearance. There is apparently a world. But what's more immediate than that? What's more fundamental than that? What's more inherent than there being objects? There is an appearance. There is seeing, there is what's seen as a singularity, as a screen, so to speak. Does awareness, and simply the awareness, the presence of this, know that there are multiple objects, know what they are, and can relate to them as real objects? No, it doesn't. It's added. It's augmented onto the experience. Now, if I'd never learned that that's a white car over there, would I be seeing a white car? I'd be seeing that, but that's not a white car. That's learned. That's based on memory and recall. That's an augmentation. That's not inherent in the seeing, in the awareness. Awareness doesn't know a multitude of objects. I go for the looking in this, by the way, because when this clarifies in the looking, it clarifies completely. It clarifies as everything really rapidly. Another one, so it's like speaking about that, is that there are separate senses. There's looking, there's hearing, there's feeling. Can you actually find them distinct in just the awareness? As their substance, presence, are there separate senses? Or is that added to this through a kind of learning, a mind augmentation? Now, you'll never find a division between hearing and seeing and feeling. That's not something that's added to the sense in mind. So then suddenly it doesn't matter if I'm kind of inquiring into this, investigating this in the seen or in the heard. It all merges together. It's seen to have never been separate. So it's seeing, sound, touch all at once. The experience becomes more simple. We're no longer going to the visual sense, going to the sound. That might be helpful in the beginning, but that's just a map that's added to this non-dual sense. The other one is that, you know, there is what I remember seeing a minute ago as a car park behind me, and it's actually there, back this way, and it resides there inherently as an external reality, and when I turn my head and look at it, my point of view is changing, and that car park is just there, and I'm turning to look at it. But that's not the experience. This gets like stupid simple. I'm not having the experience of that behind me that I know from memory. My memory is telling me, based in time, as an imagination, as a spatial map, that there is that car park behind me. In my direct experience, it doesn't exist. It's quite a boring, mundane thing to think that car park still exists behind me, and it's just inherently there. And then when I turn to look at it, I'm just turning my point of view. When you drop that, it's like when there's no point of view, reality appears from nothing. You're looking, the VR headset is projecting and creating the experience of an external world. And when I turn my head, reality conspires to generate a reality out of nothing, an experience of something physical but non-physical out of nothing. it's much more interesting, I think. So when I walk out of a room, the room's still there, only as a memory, as an imagination. It's very subtle and quick it does this. And then when I walk back into the room, I'm walking into something that was already there as the inherently existing one within this, moving through it. That's not the experience. That's an augmentation. So when you drop that, reality creates itself out of nothing and disappears back into nothing. You hear people describe like a substratum that manifests all experience and consumes all experience, birthing and deathing reality simultaneously. But again, that can be a reification of this subjective position, and that there is a substratum that resides and exists inherently into which experience comes and goes. But again, that's not the experience. There is no substratum, there is nothing there. There is no source from which everything appears. There's only appearance. There is no subject back here. There is just, I guess you could say, just the object. Again, it's tricky to point to this because I have to use one of these polarities to kind of point in a way to this, and they each serve their purpose. So it's much more interesting when this infinite shapeshifter just moves and morphs and changes, simultaneously giving the illusion of time but without actually existing in time. The paradox is next level. It's like there's so much satisfaction in just that experience then, when it's not this mundane materialist external world with this inherently existing individual here that's just in it, that's born and is going to die. But then it's not this infinite God floating in hyperspace that within which all of this is appearing, and that's what I am, and I'm beyond birth and death. But really, when you inquire into it, it's like there's still the self there. There's still something residing here inherently. When you lean into the senses, there's nothing inherent. There's no residing. It's just so weird. It's just so weird. And this is never a conclusion. The mystery just goes on and on and on, and you get lost in the mystery. I can only point to the assumptions. I can talk about them, and part of you recognises what you are that's beyond those assumptions, which isn't a you. But I can never directly tell you because we're communicating within the dualistic framework of language, relaying a thought object to a subject who then understands that and then looks into experience to confirm that objective experience. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about anything really. So similarly, there is, I know the world, I know these objects. I know what this is. The mind knows, but it's just a mystery. And as soon as you know something, you feel that you know something, it loses its mystery, because it's then just the mundane known. It loses its magic. When you get back in touch with the mystery of life, you get closer to the experience that's here, and then it's the most bizarre and miraculous thing that's always here. And like I said, you just get lost in it. And then there goes boredom, there goes apathy. Gone. You forget about that because you're too engaged in this mystery. These problems that we had are no longer. Not saying they won't come back, but it's like this ultimate hobby just kind of carries itself and then, you know, it might only be in retrospect you notice and you think, like, I've not been bored in years. I've not been, how would you say, apathetic? Suffered from apathy in years. Interesting, I just noticed that. And it's like the only thing that gives things dimensions is a relative map of sizes in relation to other objects. When what you are opens to what is not objective, there is no dimension. Again, a paradox. It's like, what makes that an object? What makes that create an object? The relative components around it as objects. What if it's not an object? What if this symbolic language that we use to give things meaning is just let go of? What if there's no meaning? What if there's no relativity? What if it doesn't need to be understood to be what it is? What if you let go of the ways it is? Then is there anything struggling within experience to figure this out? Is there anything looking for a different experience in the future? Or does any of that have to happen for this to be what it is already? Anyway, so I'm going to have to leave it for there, or for now. But as usual, let me know your experiences, and I'll talk to you next time.